Hi, this is Lisa at Wild Eye Embroidery. I'm going to show you how to make the stem stitch. Now this stitch makes a rope-like stitch and it is very beautiful. It is mostly used for outlining, but you can also use it to fill in an area. It's also a great stitch for doing curves and especially for making letters. Now I have a separate tutorial that teaches you how to do this, but I'm using 3 strands of embroidery floss today. And instead of using the strands as they come off the skein, I separate mine into individual threads, and that means that they lie nice and flat. And this does help make a nice rope effect. I'll say I have a separate tutorial for that'll take you through if you need help separating them. So if you're right-handed, you will work from the left to the right and you will go around anti-clockwise. If you're left-handed, you will work from the right to the left and you'll move around anti-clockwise. So I will start showing you how to do it right-handed, and then once I get up here I'll show you how to do it if you're left-handed. So I'm going to start at the bottom left and make sure your needle comes up right where your corners meet. So it's really important for the first stitch that you take a stitch and a half length, not 1 stitch. So if that's where my stitch would be, I'm going to come over just a little bit more. Make sure you're right on that line. Now it's crucial that you keep your loop, this little loop here, hold it down with your finger if you need to, and it has to go down the way for now. So our next stitch comes up in between this stitch and this stitch right here, so it comes up in the centre of the loop. That is extremely important, only for this first bit. Now that we've got our first stitch out of the way, we're going to go back to just our normal stitch length, not a stitch and a half. We're going to go down, keep your loop down, and this time, instead of coming up in the middle, you must come up beside this stitch here. Pull up, move across 1 stitch length, keep your loop down, come back up beside your other stitch, and just keep going exactly the same until we come to near the corner. Now what I do is I tend to push my stitches down when I'm working them, but once you finish just push them back up to create that lovely rope-like effect. Now it's time to do the corner stitch. So traditionally in stitching you will go right into the corner. For the stem stitch you must leave a tiny gap. So our last stitch will be just slightly short of the corner and it will be slightly smaller than the rest of our stitches. So keep your loop as usual, come back to that last stitch. Now as you can see we're almost in the corner, so our very last stitch will be right where the 2 lines meet, right in the centre of that corner. So we're going to turn the corner now. We come up a stitch length and we're going to go back into that corner. Make sure you get right in there. So this time we keep the loop of thread to the right. We'll come back down to where our first stitch was. And we're just going to continue doing this, taking a stitch at a time, but travelling up. We're travelling up the way, but keeping our loop to the right. Okay, so I'm close to the top corner now, so just like down here, your last stitch should be just slightly short of that corner. So don't come right into the corner. Now one more stitch before we turn, and that is the one that has to be exactly in the corner, right where the two lines meet. Now this time you're going to be working from the right to the left, and if you're left-handed, this is the way you will work all the time. You would go from the right to the left, come down, and so on. Now this time we are going to take our first stitch. This time keep your loop to the top and make sure you're going right in, right where your last stitch was. That'll give you a nice clean corner. And then once again come up and keep doing this. Remember, keep your loop up. You can't change direction with the loop at this stage. So remember, keep your loop up this time. So if you're left-handed, you're going to be using your needle in your left hand. And we're almost at the corner. So just a tiny stitch this time. And then your last stitch is right in that corner. Okay, I'm going to go back to using the needle in my right hand this time. So we're travelling down the way, and this time our loop is going to be to the left. So remember, get right in the corner where your last stitch was. Keep your loop to the left. Right up where your last stitch was. And we'll keep doing this as we continue down, always keeping that loop to the left. So nearly at the bottom. Remember, almost to the corner, but not quite. We need a little room for that very last tiny stitch. There we have it, our last stitch right in that very corner. Okay, next up I'm going to show you how to do the stem stitch when you're dealing with a curve. This is particularly handy if you are doing lettering. So I've traced on this S onto my fabric. If you're right-handed, your best way to start from the bottom of your shape and work around the outside of it, come up to here and finish off at the tip. When you're doing that, your loop is going to always be down here, and then it'll start going out to the right. You can see this when I go, but keep the loop on this side of the S. If you're left-handed, I would suggest that you start up here, keep your loop up at the top, and then come round the outside of the shape here and come right down to the bottom. So if you're doing a letter, you have nowhere to start your stitch to hide the knot. So the best way to do it is the away method, also known as the waist knot method. I do have a separate tutorial on my channel if you need to see this in depth. The first thing I'm going to do is just come down somewhere along my pattern line and leave my knot in there. I'll snip this off in a few minutes. I'm just shortening the tail so it doesn't get in the road. And then we don't start the very first stitch. I want to do a couple of stab stitches, 2 or 3 stitches along here first of all. Now take your time and make sure they're exactly on the line, because these are going to leave tiny stitches which are permanent in your piece, and you want the stitches to be as small as possible. You'll stitch straight over these in a minute. And space them a little bit apart. And you won't even notice these. Okay, so back to stem stitch. So we'll come up at the very edge, and remember to take that stitch and a half just for the very first stitch. And you're going to go straight through your stab stitches, don't worry about that. Keep your loop at the bottom. For the first stitch you come up in between. So let's move on to our second stitch with just a normal stitch length. Again, keep that loop down for now. And this time we'll come back up right beside the edge of that other stitch. And now, because we've went over the stab stitches, it's time to cut that knot off. If you have a tight curve or a tight shape and you need to get round a bend, you can shorten your stitches slightly if you need to. Now you'll notice now I'm starting to move the direction that the loop is in. When I was here I kept it down, but now when I come around this corner and get up here, I'm aiming to keep it to the right. So now we're heading up the way. And there's that loop now on the right side. So I'm going to keep heading up, and you'll see me starting to change the direction of the loop again. So you must keep the loop on the outside of the shape at all times. Don't be tempted to let the loop come in the side. That won't work. So don't let your loop fold over to the wrong side by accident. It's got to stay the same direction, to the outside. It has to stay to the outside of the shape at all times. Now we're aiming to keep the loop up the way. I'm taking a slightly smaller stitch just to get round this corner. And another slightly smaller stitch. You'll see now I'm starting to move the loop more towards the right. And I'm using variegated thread, so you'll probably now spot that the colour is changing slightly. And there's my loop to the right. As I turn the corner, the loop is going to start to go downwards. So I'm nearly at the last stitch now, so remember, don't come right down to the end of it, make your stitch slightly shorter. And then I'm now going to do the very last stitch, which will just be a tiny one. Keep your thread down as you pull through. And then just take a moment or two to smooth down any of the stitches so that everything's just lying nice and flat. And the only thing you have left to do now, just to finish off, is flip your hoop over and thread this through the back several times, and then you won't have a knot and it'll lie nice and flat. So if you're not using an embroidery hoop and you are holding the embroidery hoop in one of your hands, what you can do, and so instead of the method I showed you where we keep the loop to the outside and change direction, what you can do is just simply turn as you go. So again, your loop is going to go down to the bottom of the thread, and instead of you having to then move it to the right, all you need to do is turn your hoop and you keep it down the whole way. So keep moving your hoop and keeping it down. If you're a beginner, this might be easier for you. And down, and then turn your hoop back. And it's as simple as that. So play about with it, find what method works for you and see what you think. So if you found this tutorial useful, don't forget to give me a like and subscribe to my channel to see my latest content. Thanks so much for watching. Bye bye.